The planet Zithra was not a place where humans like to stay for long. The sky was always covered with thick, dark clouds, the air was heavy, and strange sounds came from the endless alien jungle. Most explorers only came here for short mining missions and then left as quickly as possible. But Daniel Carter had been working on this dangerous planet for 3 weeks now, alone with only a small shelter, his mining tools, and a simple communication device that rarely worked because of the storms. In the atmosphere, Daniel was not a soldier. He was just a quiet human explorer who worked for a small space mining company. Every day he collected rare crystals from the rocky hills near the jungle. The job was boring, but it paid well, and Daniel needed the money. So he stayed and did his work even when the nights became cold and the jungle became loud with strange alien creatures. That evening the wind was strong and the sky was turning dark earlier than usual. Daniel was walking back toward his shelter with a small bag of crystals on his shoulder. He was tired and only thinking about eating dinner and getting some rest, but suddenly he heard something that made him stop walking. It was a scream, not the scream of an animal, not the cry of a jungle creature. It sounded like someone calling for help. Daniel slowly turned his head toward the thick trees of the jungle. The sound came again, this time louder, sharp, and full of pain. Whoever made that sound was in serious trouble. For a moment, Daniel thought about ignoring it. The jungle of Zithra was full of dangers. Many explorers who followed strange noises never returned, but the scream came again, weaker this time, like someone was losing the strength to fight. Daniel sighed quietly and placed the bag of crystals on the ground. "All right, I will take a quick look," he muttered to himself. Then he picked up his plasma rifle and carefully walked toward the trees. The jungle quickly became darker as he moved deeper between the giant alien plants. Long glowing vines hung from the branches and strange insects flew around him. The air smelled wet and heavy, and the ground was soft under his boots. Then he heard voices, low growling voices speaking in an alien language. Daniel slowly crouched behind a thick tree and carefully looked ahead. What he saw made his eyes widen in shock. 3 tall alien hunters were standing in a small clearing. Their armor was dark and rough, and each one carried a long energy spear. In the center of the clearing, a wounded alien woman was lying on the ground. Her armor looked different, smoother, and decorated with glowing silver patterns. She was clearly important, but she was badly injured and could barely move. One of the hunters raised his spear and pointed it at her chest. The alien woman tried to stand, but she was too weak. Her breathing was slow and painful. Daniel felt his heart beat faster. He did not know who she was, and he had never seen aliens like these before. But one thing was clear. Those hunters were about to kill her. Daniel quietly lifted his plasma rifle and aimed from behind a tree. He could still walk away. This was not his fight. He was just a miner on a distant planet. But something inside him refused to let him leave. He took a slow breath and pulled the trigger. A bright blue blast shot through the air and hit one of the hunters directly in the shoulder. The alien screamed and fell backward. The other 2 hunters quickly turned in surprise, looking around for the attacker. Daniel stepped out from behind the tree and fired again. "Hey, ugly faces, why don't you fight someone who can actually shoot back?" he shouted. The hunters roared angrily and rushed toward him, their energy spears glowing bright red. The jungle clearing suddenly became a battlefield. Daniel moved quickly behind rocks and trees while firing his rifle again and again. The hunters were strong, but they were not expecting a human with a plasma weapon. After several intense moments, one hunter collapsed, and the last one finally retreated into the jungle with an angry roar. Silence slowly returned to the clearing. Daniel lowered his rifle and walked carefully toward the wounded alien woman. Up close he could see that she looked very different from the hunters. Her skin had a soft silver glow and her eyes were bright violet. Even while injured, she carried an aura of quiet power. The alien woman slowly opened her eyes and looked directly at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered weakly, "Human, you should not have done that." Daniel knelt beside her and checked her wound. "Yeah, I get that a lot," he said calmly. The alien woman studied his face carefully. Then her expression slowly changed with realization. "You saved me," she said softly. Daniel shrugged a little. Looked like you needed help. The alien woman suddenly grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Her glowing eyes locked onto his. You do not understand, human, she whispered. I am Lyra Valen, queen of the Zilori Empire. Daniel blinked in shock. The wounded alien queen continued speaking with fading strength. By the sacred law of my people, the one who saves the queen's life during battle becomes bound to her fate. Her grip tightened slightly before her strength finally began to fade. Human, you are now bound to me, she whispered. Her eyes slowly closed, and she lost consciousness in Daniel's arms. Daniel stared at her for several silent seconds, completely stunned by what he had just heard. Then he looked up at the dark, alien jungle around them and sighed deeply. Great, he muttered. Just great. And if you want to see what happens next in this strange and dangerous story, make sure to gently support the journey by subscribing to the channel, because the adventure between a human explorer and an alien queen has only just begun. Daniel Carter carried the unconscious alien woman through the thick jungle with slow and careful steps. The storm above the planet was growing stronger, and flashes of blue lightning were lighting up the dark sky again and again. Every strange sound from the forest made him more nervous, because he knew the hunters who attacked her might still be somewhere nearby, watching and waiting. The alien woman was lighter than he expected, but her armor was cold and strangely smooth under his hands. Glowing lines on the surface of the armor were slowly fading in and out like a weak heartbeat. Daniel did not understand alien technology, but he could clearly see that she was badly injured and needed help quickly. So he pushed forward through the jungle until the dim light of his small research shelter finally appeared between the rocks ahead. His shelter was simple and small, just a metal cabin placed near a cliff wall where the jungle was thinner. Inside there were only a few machines, a medical scanner, a small bed, and stacks of mining equipment. It was never meant to hold royalty from another world, but Daniel gently placed the wounded alien woman on the bed and quickly activated the medical scanner. Soft blue light moved across her body while the machine tried to understand her biology. The screen filled with strange symbols and warning signals that Daniel could not fully read. But the most important message was clear. She was alive, barely. Daniel cleaned the deep wound on her side and placed a temporary healing patch over it. He had no idea if human medicine would work on alien biology, but it was the best he could do. After several minutes, the strain scanner began to calm down, and the flashing warnings slowly disappeared. Her breathing became a little more steady, though she was still unconscious. Daniel leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. His quiet mining mission had suddenly become something far bigger and far more dangerous. He looked at the alien woman again. Her face was calm now, almost peaceful. Even though the storm outside was shaking the walls of the shelter, her silver skin reflected the soft light of the machines, and the small glowing marks on her armor showed the symbol of a crown surrounded by stars. Queen of the Zilori Empire. Daniel muttered quietly to himself, still unable to fully believe it. Hours passed slowly while the storm outside roared across the jungle. Daniel stayed awake watching the scanners, listening to every sound, but sometime deep into the night, the alien queen suddenly moved slightly, and her violet eyes slowly opened. For a moment she looked confused. Her gaze moved around the unfamiliar room, the metal walls, the strange human machines, and finally her eyes stopped when they saw Daniel sitting nearby. You are still here, human, she said quietly. Her voice was soft but carried a natural authority that was impossible to ignore. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. Yeah, well, someone had to make sure you didn't die in my bed. That would be very bad for my work report. The alien queen slowly pushed herself up slightly. Wincing in pain as she touched the healing patch on her side, she looked at it with curiosity before looking back at Daniel again. You treated my wounds, she said. Basic first aid, Daniel replied. Honestly, I had no idea if it would even work on you. The queen studied him carefully for several seconds, as if trying to understand the strange human sitting in front of her. Then she spoke again. Your name, she said. Daniel Carter, he answered. Human explorer, miner, accidental alien rescuer apparently. For the first time, a faint smile appeared on her face. "I am Lyra Valen, ruler of the Zalori Empire," she said calmly, "and you have placed yourself in great danger by saving me." Daniel crossed his arms slightly. "Yeah, you mentioned something like that before you passed out, something about being bound to you or something like that." Lyra's expression became more serious as she nodded slowly. "In the ancient laws of the Zalori people, when someone saves the life of the queen during battle, a sacred life bond is formed," she explained. "This bond is recognized by our empire as a connection of fate." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Okay, and what exactly does that mean for me?" Lyra looked directly into his eyes before answering. "It means that according to our laws, the one who saves the queen must become her life partner. The bond can only be completed through royal union." Daniel stared at her in silence for a long moment. Then he suddenly laughed in disbelief. "You're joking," he said, but Lyra did not laugh. Her face remained calm and serious. "I do not joke about sacred law," she said quietly. Daniel slowly realized she was completely serious and rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "Well, that sounds like a very interesting tradition, but I think there might be a small problem with that plan," he said. Before Lyra could respond, a sudden loud alarm sound filled the small shelter. Both of them instantly looked toward the radar screen on the wall. A red warning symbol was flashing rapidly. Daniel quickly walked to the screen, and his expression changed immediately. "What is it?" Lyra asked. Daniel pointed toward the display showing the sky above the planet. "There's a ship in orbit," he said slowly. Lyra's violet eyes narrowed as she forced herself to stand despite the pain in her side. When she looked at the radar signal, her face suddenly became cold and serious. "That is not a rescue ship," she said. Daniel turned toward her. "Then what is it?" Lyra looked toward the dark sky beyond the shelter walls. "It belongs to General Karthus," she said quietly, "the man who betrayed me." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. And at that exact moment, deep inside the jungle outside, several glowing red lights slowly appeared between the trees. Alien hunters had found their trail. The red warning lights on Daniel's radar screen kept blinking again and again, each pulse sending a small wave of tension through the quiet shelter. Outside, the storm had begun to calm, but the jungle had become even more silent than before, and on a dangerous planet like Zithra, silence usually meant that something was hunting. Daniel stared at the radar display carefully. Several small signals were slowly moving through the forest toward the shelter. They were spreading out like a search team that already knew where their target might be. Lyra stood beside him, even though the wound in her side was still fresh. Her royal armor had lost much of its glow, but her presence still carried the quiet strength of a ruler who had survived many battles. Her violet eyes focused on the radar screen for a moment before she spoke in a calm but serious voice. "They have already begun the hunt," she said quietly. Daniel crossed his arms and leaned closer to the display. "How many of them?" he asked. "At least 6 ground hunters," Lyra answered after studying the signals carefully. "And if Karthus himself is commanding this operation, there will be many more landing soon." Daniel let out a slow breath. This was no longer just a strange rescue mission. This had turned into a survival situation against an alien military force. "Well then," he said, reaching for his plasma rifle on the table, "looks like your old friend to come and say hello." Lyra turned toward him, her expression serious. "They are not here to capture us," she said. "They are here to make sure I never leave this planet alive." Outside the shelter, the jungle leaves suddenly moved slightly as a dark shape passed between the glowing plants. Daniel quickly lowered the lights inside the cabin and moved quietly toward the small window near the door. Slowly he looked outside. Through the dim blue light of the jungle, he could see them, tall figures moving carefully between the trees. The hunters had arrived. Their armor was darker than the ones he fought earlier, and their helmets had glowing red lenses that scanned the ground and the surrounding plants. Each hunter carried a long energy spear and a small device that hummed softly, probably tracking Lyra's royal armor signal. Daniel stepped back from the window and spoke in a low voice. "They're already here." Lyra closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if thinking quickly. Then she looked back at him. "We cannot stay here," she said. Daniel nodded immediately. Yeah, that part was obvious. He quickly began grabbing supplies from around the shelter, a portable scanner, extra energy cells for his rifle, a small survival pack, while Lyra slowly walked toward the door. Despite her injury, her movements were still controlled and strong. Daniel looked at her wound again with concern. "You sure you can move?" he asked. Lyra met his eyes calmly. "If I stay here, I will die. So, yes, I can move." Before Daniel could answer, a sudden sharp beam of red light flashed across the window. One of the hunters had spotted the shelter. A loud alien shout echoed through the jungle, and several red beams suddenly fired toward the metal walls. "Time to go," Daniel said quickly. He opened the back door of the shelter, and both of them rushed outside into the dark jungle behind the cliff. Strange glowing plants brushed against their legs as they ran deeper into the forest, while behind them, the hunters stormed the shelter. Energy blasts exploded against the metal cabin and sparks flew into the air, but Daniel and Lyra were already disappearing into the thick alien jungle. They ran for several minutes until the sounds of the shelter attack faded behind them. Daniel finally slowed his pace slightly and checked the scanner in his hand. "They're tracking us," he said. Lyra nodded. "They will not stop." The jungle around them became thicker as they moved forward. Giant trees with glowing blue bark rose high above them, and strange floating insects drifted through the air like small lights. But the beauty of the alien forest could not hide the danger surrounding them. Suddenly, Lyra stopped walking. Daniel looked back at her. "What is it?" he asked. Her expression looked strange now, almost confused. "I can feel something," she said slowly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Feel what?" Lyra placed a hand lightly over her chest, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "The life bond," she whispered. Daniel blinked in confusion. "The what?" Lyra looked directly at him, her voice softer now. "When you saved my life, the ancient bond of the Zalori was formed between us. It is more than a promise or a law. It is a biological connection created by our royal blood." Daniel stared at her, unsure if he should be worried or confused. "And what exactly does that mean?" he asked. Lyra hesitated for a moment before answering. "It means our minds and bodies are beginning to recognize each other as partners," she said quietly. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly the ground near them shook slightly. A powerful engine roar echoed through the jungle sky above. Both of them looked up at the same time. A massive, dark shape slowly moved through the clouds high above the planet. Bright red lights glowed along its massive metal body. Daniel's face slowly became serious as he recognized what it was. "That is not a small hunting ship," he said. Lyra's voice became cold and quiet. "No," she said, "that is Karthus's war cruiser." At the same moment, several bright searchlights suddenly cut through the jungle darkness from the sky, sweeping across the forest like giant glowing blades. The hunt had just become far more dangerous. And somewhere deep inside the jungle ahead of them, something large and unknown suddenly let out a terrifying roar. The terrifying roar that echoed through the jungle made the ground beneath Daniel's boots tremble slightly. The sound was deep and powerful, like a giant creature waking up after a long sleep. The glowing insects that floated between the trees suddenly scattered into the darkness, and for a few seconds the entire forest became silent again. Daniel slowly turned his head toward the direction of the roar, while tightening his grip on the plasma rifle, his voice low and cautious. "Please tell me that sound wasn't another one of your soldiers," he said. Lyra shook her head slowly, her violet eyes scanning the dark jungle around them. "No," she replied quietly, "that is something native to this planet, and something even my people avoid." Daniel sighed softly. "Great, alien soldiers behind us, giant jungle monsters ahead of us. This day keeps getting better." Above them, the massive war cruiser of General Karthus continued to move slowly through the clouds, its powerful searchlights sweeping across the jungle like the eyes of a giant predator. Every few seconds, the bright beams of light passed between the trees, forcing Daniel and Lyra to stay low and hidden among the glowing plants. After several tense minutes, they finally reached a narrow rocky path between tall cliffs where the jungle became thinner. Daniel stopped for a moment to catch his breath while checking the scanner again. The small moving signals of the hunters were still following their path, slowly but steadily closing the distance. "They're still on us," he muttered. Lyra looked toward the sky where the war cruiser hovered like a dark shadow above the planet. "They will not stop until I am dead," she said quietly. Daniel glanced at her for a moment before speaking. "You said earlier that this General Karthus betrayed you," he said. "Why would one of your own generals try to kill his queen?" Lyra remained silent for a few seconds, as if deciding how much truth to reveal. The wind moved gently through the alien plants around them, and the distant thunder of the storm rolled across the sky. Finally she spoke. "Karthus was once the most trusted commander of the Zalori Empire," she began slowly. "For many cycles he defended our borders and led our fleets to victory against many enemies. The Empire respected him. And so did I." Daniel leaned against the rock wall while listening carefully. "So what changed?" he asked. Lyra's expression grew darker as old memories filled her mind. "Power," she answered simply. She walked slowly toward the edge of the cliff and looked out over the dark jungle below, before continuing. "The Zalori Empire is one of the strongest civilizations in this galaxy. Our fleets control hundreds of star systems. But strength also creates ambition," she said. "Karthus believed the Empire should not only rule its territory. He believed we should conquer everything." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Including Earth, I'm guessing." Lyra nodded slightly. "Yes," she said. "Your world is young compared to ours. Your people are still expanding into space. Karthus sees humanity as weak, and he believes Earth should become a colony of the Zalori Empire before humans grow strong enough to resist." Daniel's expression became serious now. "And you disagreed," he said. Lyra turned back toward him, her voice calm but firm. "My duty is to protect my people, not start endless wars," she said. "I refuse his proposal. I ordered the fleets to avoid human territory and observe your species peacefully." Daniel crossed his arms slowly. "Let me guess, he didn't like that." Lyra shook her head. "Karthus believes mercy is weakness," she said. "And if I remain queen, he can never begin the war he wants." Daniel looked back toward the sky where the war cruiser hovered like a silent giant above the jungle. "So he decided to remove the one obstacle in his way," Daniel said quietly. Lyra nodded once more. "Yes," she said. "During a diplomatic mission to this system, he arranged an ambush. My escort fleet was destroyed, and I barely escaped the crash of my ship. The hunters you fought earlier were sent to finish what he started." Daniel let out a slow breath, realizing the full situation now. "So if you die here," he said, "he becomes the new ruler." Lyra's eyes grew colder. "And then he will lead the Empire into war, starting with your planet," she replied. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The jungle wind moved softly through the trees while the distant sound of alien engines echoed in the sky above. Daniel finally pushed himself away from the rock wall and looked at her again. "Well, that's just fantastic," he said. "My quiet mining job just turned into saving 2 entire civilizations." Lyra watched him carefully, studying the human who had unexpectedly become part of her fate. "You are free to leave this path," she said calmly. "If you escape the jungle alone, you may still reach your shuttle before the hunters find you. Helping me further will only place you in greater danger." Daniel was silent for a few seconds before answering. Then he gave a small, tired smile. "It's about that," he said. He pointed toward the sky where the war cruiser floated like a dark mountain among the clouds. "If that guy wants to conquer Earth one day, then I guess this became my problem too," he said. Lyra looked at him with quiet surprise. Daniel adjusted the energy cell on his plasma rifle and spoke again. "So what's the plan, Your Majesty?" he asked. Lyra's eyes slowly brightened as if a new idea had formed. "There is an ancient communication tower several kilometers from here," she said, pointing toward the distant mountains rising above the jungle. "It was built long ago by a forgotten alien civilization, but its systems can still send signals across the stars." Daniel looked toward the mountains in the distance. "And you want to use it to call your fleet?" he said. Yes, Lyra replied. If I can send a royal command signal, the loyal Zalori fleets will come to this system and expose Karthus's betrayal before he can take the throne. Daniel nodded slowly. Sounds like a solid plan, he said. Then suddenly his scanner beeped loudly. Both of them instantly looked down at the screen. Several new signals had just appeared much closer than before. Daniel's voice became quiet. Slight problem, he said. Lyra leaned closer to the scanner, and her eyes narrowed. The hunters, she whispered. But before either of them could react, a bright red energy net suddenly fired from the darkness behind them and wrapped tightly around Daniel's body. He crashed to the ground instantly as the electric net locked around his arms and legs. Several armored alien soldiers stepped out from the shadows of the jungle, their weapons glowing in the darkness. Daniel struggled against the net, but it tightened painfully around him. Lyra's voice filled with shock. "Daniel," she shouted. A tall figure slowly walked forward from behind the soldiers, his dark armor far more advanced than the others. The alien removed his helmet slowly. His cold yellow eyes locked directly onto Lyra. "Your escape ends here, my queen," he said calmly. Lyra's face turned pale with anger and disbelief. "General, Karthus," she whispered. The traitor had arrived. Daniel hit the ground hard as the glowing red energy net tightened around his arms and legs. The electric threads pulsed with painful shocks every time he tried to move, forcing him to stay still. The jungle floor beneath him was cold and wet, and the sharp smell of alien plants filled the air. Several armored Zalori soldiers surrounded him instantly, their weapons pointed directly at his chest, their glowing helmets reflecting the faint blue light of the forest. Lyra stood a few steps away, frozen in place, her violet eyes filled with anger and disbelief as she stared at the tall figure walking slowly toward them. General Karthus moved with calm confidence. His dark armor was far more advanced than the armor worn by the hunters. Small red lights glowed along the surface of the suit, and a long energy blade rested at his side. His cold yellow eyes showed no surprise at seeing Lyra alive, only quiet satisfaction. "I must admit, Your Majesty," Karthus said in a smooth voice, "you have been more difficult to eliminate than I expected." Lyra's hands slowly tightened into fists, the pain in her side almost forgotten as anger burned through her. "You betrayed your empire," she said sharply. "You betrayed your queen." Karthus gave a soft laugh that echoed strangely in the quiet jungle. "I betrayed nothing," he replied calmly. "I simply chose a stronger future for our people, something you were too weak to do." Daniel tried to sit up slightly, but the energy net shocked him again, sending pain through his body. "Oh yeah, definitely the villain speech type," he muttered under his breath. Karthus glanced down at him with mild curiosity. "And this must be the human who interfered with my hunters," the general said, his voice filled with quiet contempt. "Such a fragile creature causing so much trouble." One of the soldiers lifted Daniel roughly to his knees while the net still held him tightly, forcing him to face the alien general. Karthus walked closer and studied Daniel's face like a scientist observing a strange animal. "So, this is humanity," he said slowly, "a young species barely capable of surviving outside its own system." Daniel forced a small grin despite the pain. "Nice to meet you too," he replied. Karthus ignored the sarcasm and turned back toward Lyra. "You see, my queen," he said calmly. "This is exactly why the Empire needs new leadership. The galaxy is full of weak civilizations waiting to be conquered, yet you chose to protect them instead of ruling them." Lyra stepped forward slightly despite the soldiers around her. "The Zalori Empire was built to bring order, not endless war," she said firmly. Karthus shook his head slowly. "Order comes through power," he replied, "and power comes through conquest." The general then gestured toward Daniel. "This creature is proof of your weakness," he continued. "You allowed a human to save your life. You allowed yourself to be bound by an ancient law that no longer has meaning." Lyra's expression hardened immediately. "The life bond is sacred," she said. Karthus laughed again, louder this time. Sacred traditions are chains that hold the strong back, he said, and tonight I will break those chains forever. He turned to one of the soldiers and gave a simple command. Prepare the execution. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as the soldier raised a glowing energy spear beside him. Lyra's voice immediately cut through the tense air. Stop, she shouted. All movement froze instantly. Karthus looked at her with calm curiosity. Yes, your majesty, he said slowly. Lyra's eyes moved from the soldiers to Daniel, the human who had risked his life for her without knowing who she was, the human who had chosen to help her even when she told him he could escape alone. For the first time since the hunt began, uncertainty appeared in her expression. If Daniel died here, she might still find a way to escape later. But if she tried to save him now, she would lose the only chance to reach the ancient communication tower and call her loyal fleet. Her empire, or the human who saved her life. The decision hung in the air like a heavy shadow. Daniel saw the conflict in her eyes and quickly spoke. Hey, don't worry about me, he said, trying to sound calm even though the spear was inches from him. You've got a whole empire to save, remember. Lyra stared at him silently. Karthus watched the moment with amusement. Yes, listen to the human, he said smoothly. He understands his place in the universe far better than you do. For a few seconds, Lyra said nothing. The jungle wind moved softly through the tall, glowing plants around them, and the distant thunder of the storm rolled across the sky again. Then something inside her changed. Her violet eyes became sharp and clear again, no longer filled with doubt. She straightened her posture and looked directly at Karthus. You are wrong, she said calmly. The general raised an eyebrow slightly. About what? He asked. Lyra stepped forward another step, her voice strong despite the soldiers surrounding her. You believe power is the ability to destroy, she said, but true power is the courage to protect those who stand beside you. Karthus's expression slowly darkened. Lyra then turned her gaze toward Daniel for a brief moment. And this human, she continued, has shown more honor in a single day than you have in your entire life. Before anyone could react, Lyra suddenly moved. Her injured body moved faster than the soldiers expected. She grabbed one guard's weapon and twisted it sharply. The energy spear fired wildly into the air as she struck the soldier down. At the same moment, she slammed the weapon into the control device attached to Daniel's energy net. The net instantly shut down and collapsed around him. Daniel rolled to the side just as another soldier fired a blast toward them. The jungle exploded into chaos once again. Energy bolts flashed between the trees as Lyra and Daniel fought side by side. The queen moving with surprising speed despite her injury, while Daniel grabbed his plasma rifle and returned fire. Karthus stepped back calmly, watching the sudden battle with cold eyes. You choose a human over your empire, he said quietly. Lyra blocked an incoming attack and shouted back. I choose what is right. Karthus shook his head slowly, as if disappointed. Then you have already lost, he replied. High above the jungle, the war cruiser's engines suddenly roared louder. More drop ships were descending from the clouds. And the final battle for the future of two civilizations was about to begin. The jungle exploded with flashes of red and blue light as energy weapons fired in every direction. The quiet alien forest that once felt mysterious and calm had now become a battlefield. Daniel rolled behind a thick tree trunk as a blast of red plasma scorched the ground where he had been standing only seconds earlier. The smell of burned plants filled the air, while glowing leaves slowly drifted down from shattered branches above. The Zaylori soldiers were spreading out quickly, forming a tight circle around him and Queen Lyra, moving like trained predators closing in on their prey. Daniel quickly checked the charge on his plasma rifle and leaned slightly out from behind the tree, firing two bright blue blasts toward the nearest soldier. The shots forced the armored hunter to dive behind a rock, giving Lyra enough time to move across the clearing and disarm another enemy with a fast strike of her captured energy spear. Even injured, she moved with deadly precision. Every movement controlled and powerful, The silver patterns on her royal armor were glowing brighter again as adrenaline and determination pushed her forward. "Daniel, we cannot stay here," she called out over the sound of weapons fire. Daniel fired another shot before ducking back into cover. "Trust me, I'm not planning to build a house here," he shouted back. Above them, the massive war cruiser of General Carthus roared across the sky like a metal thunderstorm, its engines lighting the clouds with dark red flames as several smaller drop ships descended through the storm and began landing deeper inside the jungle. Each ship carried more soldiers ready to join the hunt. Carthus himself stood calmly near the edge of the clearing, watching the battle unfold with cold patience. His yellow eyes showed no anger or panic, only the quiet confidence of someone who believed victory was already certain. Daniel noticed him standing there and shouted toward Lyra. "Your general doesn't look too worried," he said. Lyra glanced briefly toward Carthus before knocking another soldier to the ground. "That is because he believes we have no escape," she replied. Daniel gritted his teeth as another blast hit the tree beside him, sending burning bark into the air. "Well, we better prove him wrong fast," he said. Lyra quickly moved beside him behind the cover of a large rock, her breathing slightly heavier now, but her eyes still sharp and focused. "There is only one chance left," she said quickly. "The ancient communication tower is less than 2 kilometers from here. If we reach it, I can send a royal command signal to my loyal fleets." Daniel peeked over the rock and fired another shot toward the approaching soldiers. "And how long does that signal take to work?" he asked. Lyra answered without hesitation. "Only a few minutes," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then that's our new plan," he replied. He quickly checked the direction on his scanner and pointed toward a narrow path leading deeper into the jungle hills. "Tower should be that way," he said. Lyra stood up beside him and raised the captured spear. "Then we run," she said. Without another word, they both burst from cover and sprinted toward the rocky path, Daniel firing behind them, while Lyra blocked incoming blasts with fast movements of the spear. The jungle around them blurred as they rushed through glowing plants and twisted roots. The sounds of enemy soldiers shouting echoed behind them as the hunters quickly began the chase again. Above the jungle, Carthus watched their escape calmly before activating a small communication device on his armor. "Release the aerial drones," he ordered quietly. Within seconds, several small, flying machines launched from the war cruiser and began scanning the jungle from above, their red lights searching through the darkness for any sign of movement. Meanwhile, Daniel and Lyra continued running through the rocky hills until the trees suddenly opened into a large ancient valley surrounded by tall stone cliffs. At the center of the valley stood a massive structure unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. The ancient communication tower rose high into the sky like a giant metal needle, covered with strange glowing symbols carved into its surface. Parts of the structure looked broken and old, but faint blue lights still pulsed slowly along its base, showing that some systems were still alive after thousands of years. Daniel stopped for a moment and stared up at the tower in amazement. "Well, that thing definitely looks important," he said. Lyra nodded while catching her breath. "It was built by a civilization that disappeared long before my empire existed," she explained, "but its signal system is powerful enough to reach across entire star systems." Daniel looked back toward the jungle behind them, where distant engine sounds were already approaching. "Then we better turn on fast," he said. They quickly ran toward the entrance of the tower. The large metal doors were partially open and covered with alien markings that glowed softly in the darkness. Inside the tower, the air felt colder and quieter. Ancient machines lined the circular walls, while a large control platform stood at the center of the room. Lyra stepped onto the platform and placed her hand on a glowing control panel. Strange alien symbols lit up instantly around her as the system recognized her royal genetic signature. "The tower is activating," she said. Daniel stood near the entrance with his rifle ready while watching the jungle outside. "Please tell me your fleet is nearby," he said. Lyra focused on the control system as streams of light moved across the ancient devices. "My loyal fleets patrol several nearby systems," she replied. Once the signal is sent, they will know the truth about Karthus's betrayal. Outside the tower, the sound of approaching engines suddenly grew louder. Daniel stepped outside, just in time to see several Zalori drop ships landing at the edge of the valley, while dozens of soldiers rushed toward the tower entrance. He turned back toward Lyra urgently. "You might want to speed up that message," he called. Lyra did not look away from the controls. "It is already transmitting," she said. Daniel raised his rifle and took position at the tower entrance. The wind blew strongly across the valley as enemy soldiers began climbing the rocky path toward him, their weapons glowing in the dim light. High above the clouds, the massive war cruiser suddenly changed direction and began descending toward the valley, its enormous shadow covering the ancient tower like a dark eclipse. Inside the control room, the signal beam from the tower shot high into the sky like a bright pillar of light. Daniel watched the approaching army and muttered quietly, "Well, let's hope your friends answer that call," because the battle for the Empire had only just begun. The ancient communication tower shook slightly as powerful winds rushed through the valley. The bright beam of light shooting from the top of the structure pierced the dark clouds above like a glowing spear, its signal racing across the stars, carrying the royal command of Queen Lyra to every loyal Zalori fleet in nearby systems. Inside the tower, Daniel Carter stood near the entrance with his plasma rifle ready, his eyes fixed on the rocky valley outside, where enemy soldiers were quickly moving closer, their armored figures spreading across the ground like shadows preparing to swallow the tower whole. Daniel fired another bright blast toward the advancing troops, forcing two soldiers to dive behind a broken stone pillar. Sparks of blue energy lit the valley for a brief moment before darkness returned again. The sound of engines roared overhead as General Karthus's massive war cruiser descended lower through the clouds, its enormous metal body casting a dark shadow across the tower and the surrounding cliffs. Inside the control chamber, Lyra stood still at the ancient console. Streams of glowing alien symbols continued to move across the old machines while the signal transmission completed its final sequence. Her eyes were calm now despite the chaos outside. She knew the signal had been sent, and now only one question remained. Would her loyal fleets reach the planet before Karthus destroyed everything? Daniel glanced back toward her while reloading his rifle. "Please tell me that signal worked," he called out. Lyra slowly stepped away from the console and looked toward the sky through the open roof of the tower. "It has reached them," she said quietly. "Now we must trust that loyalty still exists within the Empire." Before Daniel could respond, a massive explosion shook the ground outside. Part of the valley wall collapsed as one of the war cruiser's cannons fired a warning blast near the tower. Dust and broken rock filled the air, while dozens of enemy soldiers began rushing forward under the cover of the explosion. Daniel gritted his teeth and raised his rifle again. "Well, your general seems very motivated," he muttered. Outside the valley, General Karthus stood at the front of his advancing army, his dark armor reflecting the red light of the descending war cruiser above him, his cold yellow eyes focused entirely on the ancient tower. "She is trying to call for help," he said calmly to the soldiers beside him, "but no fleet will arrive in time." He raised his hand slightly and gave a simple order: "Destroy the tower." The soldiers began charging forward immediately, weapons glowing bright as they prepared to storm the entrance. Inside the tower, Daniel stepped forward into the doorway, planting his feet firmly on the metal floor as he aimed his rifle down the rocky path leading to the valley. "Well," he muttered quietly, "guess it's just us for now." Lyra moved beside him, her captured energy spear glowing again in her hand, the silver patterns of her armor shining brighter as she prepared to fight once more. "Then we stand together," she said calmly. The next few minutes became a storm of energy blasts and flying sparks as enemy soldiers rushed toward the tower again and again. Daniel fired carefully controlled shots, while Lyra moved with graceful speed beside him, knocking back enemies who came too close to the entrance. Despite their determination, the number of soldiers continued to grow as more drop ships landed around the valley. Then suddenly something unexpected happened. The sky above the clouds flashed with dozens of bright white lights. At first Daniel thought it was lightning from a storm, but the lights continued multiplying across the sky until the dark clouds themselves seemed to tear open. Lyra's violet eyes widened slightly as she recognized what it was. "They came," she whispered. High above the planet, massive shapes appeared through the clouds. Enormous starships of silver and blue metal dropping out of hyperspace one after another, their glowing engines lighting the sky like a second sunrise. The loyal fleets of the Zalori Empire had arrived. Within seconds, the peaceful sky above the jungle turned into a battlefield as the loyal warships immediately engaged Karthus's cruiser. Beams of energy flashed between the massive vessels, while explosions lit the clouds with bright fire. The ground soldiers in the valley suddenly stopped as they realized their commander was no longer in control of the sky. Daniel looked up in amazement while lowering his rifle slightly. "Well, looks like your message worked," he said. Lyra allowed herself a small breath of relief, but her eyes remained focused on the battlefield. "It is not over yet," she replied. Outside the tower, General Karthus looked up at the arriving fleets with a dark expression. His perfect plan was falling apart faster than he expected. But instead of retreating, he drew the long, glowing blade from his armor and began walking toward the tower himself. "If the Queen dies here," he said coldly, "the Empire will still fall into my hands." Moments later, the towering figure of the general appeared at the entrance of the communication tower, his blade humming with deadly energy as he stepped over the bodies of fallen soldiers. Daniel raised his rifle instantly, but Karthus moved faster, deflecting the shot with his blade before lunging forward. The impact of the alien general's strength forced Daniel back several steps inside the tower. Lyra rushed forward with her spear and blocked the next strike, the clash of their weapons sending bright sparks across the metal floor. "You should have stayed dead, my queen," Karthus growled. Lyra's voice remained steady as she pushed against his blade. "The Empire deserves better than you," she replied. The duel between them moved quickly across the chamber, their glowing weapons clashing again and again while Daniel circled around looking for an opening. Finally, he saw the moment he needed. As Karthus raised his blade for another strike, Daniel fired a powerful blast directly at the control unit on the back of the general's armor. The shot exploded against the device, sending a wave of sparks through the suit and causing Karthus to stagger. Lyra did not hesitate. With one precise movement, she drove her spear forward and struck the center of his armor. The energy blade in Karthus's hand flickered once before falling silent as the defeated general collapsed to the ground. Silence slowly filled the tower again, while the distant battle of starships continued in the sky above. Daniel lowered his rifle and looked down at the fallen traitor. "Well, that problem seems solved," he said quietly. Hours later, the battle in orbit finally ended with the loyal fleets capturing Karthus's war cruiser. The surviving soldiers surrendered quickly once they realized the Queen still lived. The Empire had been saved from the war that Karthus wanted to begin. Several days later, on the capital world of the Zalori Empire, thousands of citizens gathered inside the Grand Royal Hall as Queen Lyra officially returned to her throne. The shining city stretched far beyond the palace walls, while giant banners of silver and violet hung proudly above the crowd. Daniel Carter stood beside the Queen, wearing simple human clothing, still looking slightly uncomfortable in a room full of powerful alien nobles staring at him with curiosity. The royal advisor stepped forward and spoke loudly to the hall. "The Queen lives because of the actions of this human," he announced. Murmurs spread through the crowd as everyone looked toward Daniel again. Then Lyra stood from her throne and raised her hand for silence. Her voice echoed clearly through the hall. "This human saved my life," she said. "He protected me when my own general betrayed the Empire, and he fought beside me when the fate of our civilization was uncertain." She turned toward Daniel and looked directly into his eyes. "In the ancient laws of the Zalori people, a life bond was formed between us on the battlefield," she continued. The entire hall grew quiet as the nobles realized what she was about to say. Lyra's voice remained calm, but powerful. "By the sacred law of our empire," she declared, "the one who saves the queen's life becomes bound to her destiny." She stepped closer to Daniel and spoke the words that would change both their lives forever. "You will be my husband, human." The royal hall erupted into shocked whispers and stunned silence at the same time. Daniel